morning, National Readers, and good morning to Judith Duthie, who joins me this morning. How are you doing, Judith?
Good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. A little bit shattered already. It's
Yes.
been some 24 hours for political news, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
There's so much going on. So far this morning, I think we're up to 15 resignations.
Okay, I'd actually lost count, so it's useful to know that. So.
It's entirely possible that in the 5 minutes it took me to get set up on the live stream, there have been more resignations. So I don't know at this point. I know that Abby Garton Crosby, who's one of our political journalists, she's down at Westminster today, and I asked her to film a video of her walking us through all of the resignations so far. And in the time it's taken for me to download that and put captions on it, there's been 4 more resignations. So it's just going to be one of those days, I think.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because I remember marking yesterday morning saying how everything seemed to have quietened down and it was obviously coming into the summer season. And and then everything changed really. I mean, it was quite late in the day, around about 6 o'clock, when it was Health Secretary Sajid Javid who was the first to go. And then by the time we caught up with the news later, then obviously there was a raft of further resignations. So yeah, it's been really interesting that there seems to have been a kind of tipping point. And the resignation of Javid as well as Rishi Sunak has really kind of opened the floodgates, it seems, for a whole raft of resignations. Interesting whether it was coordinated or whether it has just been the case that because 2 such high-profile names went first, whether that's then given people the impetus to follow. So I think there's kind of various thoughts and theories on whether it is a hugely coordinated action or whether this is just a kind of a domino effect almost in terms of everything happening. So yeah, but I think it was a move that took everybody by surprise, although you did see the photos of the cabinet yesterday morning. There was a cabinet meeting and it did not seem like a very happy ship at all. There was a lot of very glum faces and everything like that, so that was maybe a sign of things to come later in the day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we got a lot of enjoyment out of watching the footage of all of the cabinet ministers looking very, very fed up listening to Boris Johnson's nonsense in their meeting yesterday morning. But I think we should probably note that there's still quite a lot of cabinet ministers who are backing Boris. Some of those, I think you could probably tell us before we tell you. That's going to be the likes of Nadine Dorries. We've also got Michael Gove came out and supported the Prime Minister last night, which you never really know what Michael Gove's up to. I don't really know what his intentions are there. I suspect he still thinks that he could probably be Prime Minister one day. He's got the backing of Alistair Jack, the Scottish Secretary, which does make Alistair Jack one of 2 Tory MPs for Scotland who still support the Prime Minister. That's him and David Dogood. We'll have to keep a close eye on the Scottish Tories and see what they're saying today. But of course, they apparently didn't have anybody available for Good Morning Scotland this morning. So yeah, we're not up to date on what they're saying just now. So Judith, I'd really love to know why do you think the Chris Pincher scandal is the straw that's broken this camel's back?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, isn't it, of all the scandals we've had, for everything from Partygate to, I mean, there's been numerous things that have gone on, but I don't know whether maybe it's just the MPs just felt that they couldn't carry on trying to defend Boris Johnson when he blatantly lies. Is obviously this came about because of the kind of handling of the Deputy Chief Whip's allegations about sexual misconduct, and Johnson claimed that he didn't know anything about them, and then it emerged that he did. So, I mean, you can imagine being a kind of minister, that is being asked to go on programmes and try and defend your boss who is saying one thing which is clearly not the case. Then I wonder whether this was just the kind of final straw for some of them. And I think, as I was saying before, that I think because the Health Secretary and Chancellor both went such high profile names, then that really kind of triggered everybody else to go. I think if it had been, a couple of minor ministers or less high profile people, then wouldn't have had as much of an impact. But I think this really has been the tipping point. So yeah, so I don't know if you have any theories yourself, Laura, on why it might have been this particular scandal.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that the downfall of Boris has been something that's been chipping away, honestly, for, I would say, probably about 8 or 9 months. I think the first big moment I really noticed when the sort of mainstream press decided they weren't quite so on board with him was really that Peppa Pig speech to the CBI last year. And I think that was around November. And this was when we were first starting to hear about the risks of the cost of living crisis, which was going to start this year. And that really did seem to start to turn people against him. And of course, then we have Partygate, and it's just been this real slow burn. And I think in a way, there was always going to be something that pushed it over the edge that ministers just felt they couldn't support anymore. And this just happens to be the thing. But what is very interesting this morning is that we've now got some real Johnson loyalists jumping on board the Johnson hate train. Those include Jonathan Gullis. Now, you may remember watching him at PMQs and him braying like a hyena whenever Boris Johnson spoke. He's a really big supporter of the Prime Minister until now. And Lee Anderson, who you've just been writing about, Judith, was he the one who claimed he could live on 30 pence a day? Is that right?
That's right, yeah. He was the one that sparked a huge backlash when he was basically claiming that, food bank users don't really need to use food banks because if they just learn to cook properly, then they could quite easily survive on 30 pence a meal days. 30 pence a day meals. So it's kind of interesting. He was definitely been a Johnson loyalist, and he issued a statement basically saying they questioned the Prime Minister's integrity and that he doesn't hold a post, so he couldn't resign. But this was his way of making his feelings known. So yeah, it's interesting that there are loyalists now that are turning on the Prime Minister as well. So absolutely, it'll be interesting.
Sorry, go ahead, Judith.
No. And I was just going to say it'll be interesting to see what happens next, because there are reports that the 1922 committee is going to meet this afternoon at 5 o'clock. That's the kind of latest report I've seen. So obviously what happens next is now up for question. Johnson survived the leadership, the vote of no confidence last month, I think it was, wasn't it, last month? It seems like so long ago because there's so much that happens. But so he survived that, which under the current rules means that he should be safe for a year. But there's now moves afoot by Tory rebels to try and change the rules. So whether they succeed in doing that, that's one method by which he could be ousted if they change the rules so that they can vote to replace him. So that's one way in which he could go. The other is whether there will be mounting pressure on him with this huge amount of resignations and with formerly loyal MPs turning against him, whether that'll be enough to force him to resign. But to be honest, I'm not sure he's one for resigning. I think if he was going to resign, then he would have done it, before now over a different matter. So I can't actually see him quitting, although I could be proved wrong. But yeah, I think that's probably not the most likely scenario at this stage. Oh, and have you got you, Laura?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry
about
that. My internet dropped out. Yeah, I was just going to say, I was watching an episode of The Thick of It last night where they're having that conversation about when is a good resignation. And one of them says, I need to really take the dignified way out. And the civil servant responds, you missed that. That was straight away, basically. And I couldn't help but think that applies to Boris Johnson in this situation. We have got an interesting comment here from Ronnie, who says Scotland needs Boris Johnson in place. The last thing we need is Westminster steering the ship. And I suppose that is a message I've heard across the independence movement quite a lot, which is this idea that Boris Johnson is a great recruiting sergeant for Scottish independence, and would we potentially lose support if we had somebody maybe more sensible like Jeremy Hunt in charge? Or are we really kind of on this journey to independence and the personalities don't matter so much? I was just wondering what your take on that was, Judith.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it doesn't really change the kind of basic argument for independence in terms of, voting for, Scots don't get the government that they vote for, and how, Scotland could do better as an independent country. So, I mean, I think the personalities, certainly Boris Johnson has certainly helped the independence movement, but I think what would be really key is to move the argument beyond that and look at the kind of wider issues around, why independence would benefit Scotland. And, and there's also not to say who's he might be replaced by somebody worse, although you can't really think of who that might be at the moment. But certainly, well, there's maybe a few candidates, but certainly, a Conservative government, if they carry on, then I think they're not going to change their spots in terms of their policies and things like their migration policies and everything like that. So I think there is definitely a kind of wider argument for independence that will still maintain no matter who's in charge at Westminster.
For sure, I hear that argument. And I also think, well, we got to 45% for yes in 2014 with David Cameron, who by all accounts was considered significantly more moderate than Boris Johnson is. So it's entirely possible to do it without Boris, although Boris has, of course, been a really huge driving factor. And we all saw the SNP's Holyrood campaign last year where they just had his hair. And that was just like a warning to people about what would happen if we continue moving with Westminster. So the fact that just his hair alone can say so much, it will be interesting to see what happens if he does go. But another part of the independence question here is that, of course, last week Nicola Sturgeon laid out her plans for the independence referendum. Hopefully that will happen in October 2023. But if not, she intends to use the general election as a de facto referendum. Now, what's going to happen if there's a snap general election? Is that whole plan going to kind of be scuppered? Is everything just up in the air at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because obviously if, that general election took place in September, then there'd be very little time to get the momentum going on an independence campaign. So, but whether a general election will happen so quickly, I'm not entirely convinced. I guess Boris Johnson could take the risk and go for it and an attempt to see off the rebellion. But it's been an interesting question as to what the SNP would do if it was coming up so soon. So absolutely.
Yeah,
coming
up
today, yeah.
Sorry.
No. But I was just going to say, coming up today, obviously, is PMQs. So Boris Johnson will be grilled during PMQs this afternoon. So if Keir Starmer can't land a few blows on him at this time, then there's really no hope for Labour. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that.
Of course, and there's the liaison committee later as well. So some Labour MPs will be able to get stuck into him, and we'll have SNP MP Angus McNeil, who's the chair of the International Trade Committee. He will also get a turn to put some questions to the Prime Minister. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. It's very well timed, isn't it, from these people resigning, that Boris has to face the music so much today. A little bit suspicious. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. I'm sure there'll be tons more to get through, and by the time we do our live stream tomorrow morning, there'll have been, about 10 years worth of politics happening within the next 24 hours. So thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, leave them on the comments and we'll see if we can get to them by tomorrow's live stream. And don't forget, we are Scotland's only pro-independence daily newspaper. And if you want to keep up to date with us online today and with all of our in-depth analysis, exclusive comment, exclusive news, you'll need to take out a subscription at thenational.scot/subscribe. And I believe we have some offers on at the moment as well. So thank you so much for joining me again, Judith.
No problems, and it'd be interesting to see who's resigned while we've been doing this live stream. So we'll
I know, I'm going to rush back to my desk and see what's happened. And thank you very much to all of our wonderful readers for joining us too. Enjoy the rest of your day and this crazy political